don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to notice that sometimes we will buy things that we have no intention of eating and yet end up eating them. For example, maybe you're going to go to the store doing your groceries and buy some treats for the children, but then eventually somehow the children aren't the one eating the treats, you are. Today we're talking about why we can't trust ourselves with food. Hello everyone, welcome to Mind Blowing Health and Wellness with Violet. I like to help people to understand that psychology and health and wellness go hand in hand. And today we're talking about the fact that for most of us, it's really difficult to trust ourselves with food. Now, of course, in this topic, we have the first and most obvious, emotional eating. And I think when people think about emotional eating, what they're thinking is, I feel sad, depressed, so I eat. And although that is something that classically happens to emotional eaters, I want to point out that it's not the only way that we emotionally eat. And I feel like that's the reason that most of us don't even notice that we're doing it. How can I trust myself with food when I don't actually understand the mechanisms that push me towards eating, right? We emotionally eat, of course, when we're sad, like I just said, but also when we're happy. We celebrate with food. We also emotionally eat when we're bored. We emotionally eat sometimes when we're angry. We emotionally eat when we're frustrated. As a matter of fact, almost any negative or positive emotion could be a reason that we decide to eat something. And I think if we don't let ourselves see that we do this, then it just becomes natural, normal. This is what I do. Unfortunately, this what we do thing that we're doing is helping us to be at a weight that we're not happy with. It's also helping us to have metabolic issues. So we're actually getting sick because we don't realize that sometimes we're eating food because of an emotional reason and not about a hunger reason. For those of us that actually track our meals and track our foods, I want you to check something. I want you to go back and look at the days where you've tracked and recognized that, I didn't eat the best on those days. And what you're very likely to notice is that on the days where you were having a harder time, so if something negative was happening in your life, if there were difficult things happening at work, if there were difficult things happening to people that you care about and you were worried for them, whenever we have difficult times, we're much more likely to eat quote unquote fun foods. So we're much more likely to go towards snacks and things to help us feel better. And I feel like the only reason that we don't notice this is because we actually don't take the time to check. And so we don't actually associate those snack foods and the fact that we ate snack foods with how our day went. But I'm inviting you, go and check. Look back at times where things were difficult. If you do track your food and see, how did it look? Or in the future, as you're going forward, when you find yourself reaching for chips, check. Was today hard? Or am I celebrating something? Again, we don't pay attention, so we don't recognize that that's a part of what we're doing. Another reason that it's really difficult for us to trust ourselves with food is the fact that when we're hungry, we tend to underestimate the amount of food on our plate. And actually, if you think about it, there's a good example of this that most of us understand because we've lived this before. This example of when you go grocery shopping hungry, you tend to buy more food than when you go grocery shopping when you're not hungry. And it's playing on the same idea that when I'm hungry, then I feel like I need everything. And it's the same thing when you're making your plate. When I'm hungry and I'm making myself some food, I underestimate how much an ounce is. I underestimate how much a gram is. I underestimate these things. And a gram is a small number too. So it's hard to sometimes judge what that is. But this is where having a food scale comes in, right? Because if I'm actually trying to do something very specific, like manage a metabolic issue or manage my weight, then I really do want to know how much I'm eating, just because I need to know for my carbohydrates. I need to make sure that if I'm trying to live a ketogenic lifestyle, for example, that I'm keeping my grams under whatever the number you've decided for your ketogenic lifestyle, which for some people is 50, for some people is 20. One of the things that I realized when I was trying to keep my carbohydrates under 20, and I still do, is that I was underestimating how much two tablespoons was. So whenever I would make my morning coffee, and I thought I was putting 2 tablespoons of heavy cream in my coffee, when I actually decided to just pour the same amount but pour it in a measuring cup to actually see how much was I putting, it was actually more like 3.75 tablespoons of cream in my coffee. So what I learned by doing that experiment was that what I thought was 2 tablespoons was significantly more than 2 tablespoons. It was double or almost double. So what's happening if I allow myself to do that with every single thing that I'm eating? Well, that quickly led to me buying a food scale and weighing and measuring the majority of the things that I was doing while I was in that weight loss process, because I really did want to make sure that what I thought was 20 grams per day was actually 20 grams per day. So that's the other thing I want to point out, is that we underestimate how much we're eating. Food is and will always be the most important part of the process when you're trying to lose weight. And the other reason that I feel like we can't trust ourselves with food is because we don't understand that part of the puzzle. We don't understand that exercise is about muscle gain and flexibility, versus food is about how much nutrients I intake to build my body and to keep my body at a certain weight. It's really important for us when we're trying to fix metabolic issues and we're trying to stabilize our weight that we understand what food is doing. When we're preparing our plate, what we need to understand is the food that we're putting on our plate is going to determine the building blocks for our body and the energy we have for the next number of hours, however many hours that's going to be for you. Everybody's different. So when I'm preparing my plate, especially when I'm in a process of trying to solve a metabolic issue or to lose weight, one of the things I have to be careful about is understanding that if I underestimate the number of carbohydrates, which is an energy source, if I underestimate the number of carbohydrates that I'm putting on my plate, then number one, I end up having more energy on the plate than I was thinking about, because I have the fats that are coming along with the protein source that I'm eating. I have the vegetables and the protein that are going to help build my body with macronutrients, protein, and micronutrients, all the vegetable minerals and minerals and vitamins in the food. But then I have the carbs that come along with those vegetables, and I have the fats that came along with the protein. And if I underestimate the amount of carbs on my plate, I will possibly push my body into an insulin spike, which will push me into a fat storing mode, which will mean that everything on my plate is now potentially stored. That's important. If I'm trying to heal myself, I need to allow myself to recognize that being careful about the number of carbs on my plate and allowing myself to stay a fat burner is really, really healthy for me. So let's not underestimate how many carbs we're putting on our plate. Let's be very careful to know that the amount of carbs I put on my plate determines whether I store fat or burn the fat that I'm ingesting. The final thing that we do, or this is the final thing that I'm going to talk about today that we do that causes us to not be able to trust ourselves with food, is we give ourselves excuses. It's just a little bit of this, or it doesn't really matter that. Again, if I'm trying to diminish my weight or I'm trying to solve a metabolic issue, then yes, it does matter. You know, like I said, I didn't realize that I was putting 4 tablespoons until I measured it. But it also means that if I decide that, it's no big deal, like I can eat this one, whatever it is, how many carbs are in that one, whatever it is? Is it enough carbs that pushes me above my 20 carbs that I have for the day? One of the things that I wasn't paying attention to, but then I started to pay attention to, because again, what's the point of measuring, right? So pay attention to this. What's the point of measuring and putting in and having a scale and knowing exactly what you put in and then, licking the spoon, right? But it's things that we do and we've always done because we think it's okay. Is it really okay? Is that really what you want to do, is add a few more grams of whatever and not track it? It's important to track. And it's important to know that you're tracking what you're supposed to be tracking. So if you're going to lick that spoon, then you better know how many grams of carbs are on it, right? Look, at the end of the day, nobody's perfect. I'm not expecting you guys to be perfect. I'm not perfect. What I'm saying is, let's be honest and realistic with ourselves about how we're tracking, what we're tracking, because in order for us to do this well, we need to understand that the food that we eat is building the body that we're creating for tomorrow and the years to come. And then does that little bit that I'm saying, it doesn't matter, is it enough to push me over? It's really important to recognize that my body is the one that's going to tell me if that's enough or not enough. And that means in order for me to really know, I have to be tracking properly so that if this week or this month or whatever, however often you're weighing yourself, if I don't get the results that I'm looking for, then I can look back at what I was eating and say, okay, yeah, this week I ended up eating more than I was expecting because I tracked it all, versus I was on track, and then I need to look at, are there other issues happening that are causing me to not be able to get the results that I want? I won't really be sure if I'm not tracking everything. Our body tries to maintain a constant level of sugar in the blood system at all times. Actually, that amount is 1 teaspoon. So 1 teaspoon of sugar is 5 grams of carbohydrates. Now, our body is working really hard to maintain that 1 teaspoon. It works so hard that as soon as it goes up, insulin goes up, and our body is pushing that out, usually into fat storage. That's how important it is for our body to keep our sugar at 1 teaspoon approximately, but not above that. So we need to look at this sugar scenario as it being toxic, because our body doesn't allow more than 1 teaspoon in the bloodstream. That's telling us that it can't handle that. And is what we notice when people get to the point where their body can no longer move the sugar out, we start to get sick, right? That's how we get diabetes. That's how we get a bunch of other situations happening, right? So what we need to do is we need to look at sugar in the system like alcohol in the system as toxic, because actually it's the same. When we have alcohol in our system, there's a certain threshold that you can get to, so you can ingest alcohol. Although it's toxic, you will not die. And at a certain threshold, though, your body will start to react and you will feel tipsy. If we keep pushing that envelope, at some point you will become drunk. That's the point at which your body was no longer able to manage the amount of alcohol that was in you, and you become drunk, and eventually, possibly, you could pass out and potentially even die if you have too much alcohol in your system. Okay, why am I telling you this? We need to keep in mind that when our body is working super, super hard to get sugar out of our system, so hard that it will increase our weight to really difficult ranges where we physically can't move around the way we want to move around, in order to keep our blood sugar at a certain level, we need to understand that that's important. It's important information that our body's giving us, that this sugar level cannot go above that. So what do I do with that information? In a ketogenic lifestyle, we are restricted to somewhere between 50 and 20 grams of carbohydrates per day. Personally, I went with 20 grams of carbohydrates per day, which is 20 grams of carbohydrates is 4 teaspoons of sugar per day. Now, you have to keep in mind what's really happening here. When we restrict ourselves to 20 grams or less per day, or 50, depending on what number you're working with, what we're actually doing is we're keeping ourselves in a mode where we are burning fat for fuel all the time. How does that help us? Because we're still ingesting carbs, right? Why is it that these 20 carbs per day that I'm ingesting is reacting differently than the 100 grams or the 200 grams or the 300 grams that other people are ingesting? Obviously, there's the bulk, there's the amount. The more grams of carbs you ingest, the more likelihood you will to push your insulin up, because, and this is what I believe is actually happening, there's a certain amount of carbohydrates that your body can easily shuttle into different areas of use. So we store glycogen on our bodies, which is carbohydrates. It can shuttle it there. We use some of it right away for energy that we're doing things, picking up something heavy, running up the stairs. It'll use it there. And our brains use a little bit of carbohydrates on a regular basis. It will use it there. So I believe that the reason that 20 grams of carbs a day, or 35 or 18 or 14 or whatever your number happens to be, but I believe that keeping your carbs under 50 grams a day, for the average person, myself being 20, it works, because when your carbohydrate number is that low, Your body's just able to use what you're ingesting, and so there's not excess carbs floating around in your bloodstream to cause problems, because your body will not allow that. It will do what it needs to do to get it out of your system, and for most people that means pushing it to fat stores. And then we end up obese, we end up with metabolic issues, we end up, right, because it's doing other things in the system that are unhealthy. The majority of us recognize that it's not a great idea to walk around drunk or tipsy all the time. Yet we allow ourselves to walk around with too much sugar in our system. Now, I do recognize that the reason we do this is because we don't know. I did it for years because I didn't know. I was unaware that we didn't need to have that many carbohydrates in our system. I was even unaware that bread was a sugar. Like, even though it's obvious it's a carbohydrate, but to have labeled bread sugar, I wouldn't have done that in my history. To have labeled a potato sugar, I wouldn't have done that in my history. I would have looked at that as a grain or as a vegetable, and I would have thought it's fine to eat. Today, I'm recognizing that it's a starch and it's a grain and it's full of carbohydrates that are just going to harm my system and make me feel bad. And trust me, I've had that experience. So, once you realize that carbohydrates are causing you to gain weight, then you have the possibility of changing what you're doing, limiting the amount of carbohydrates you ingest, only allowing your carbohydrates to come from nutrient dense sources. It absolutely makes sense to me to eat broccoli because of all the phytonutrients, micronutrients, vitamins that I'm going to get from broccoli, that I will risk the small amount of carbohydrates that comes along with broccoli. I'll do the same thing with kale. I'll do the same thing with cauliflower. I'll do the same thing with a lot of other vegetables that are nutrient dense and give me what I need to build my body. They also come with protein. Don't forget, there's a lot of things in these foods that are helping me to build my body compared to what nutrient density do I get from eating a cookie? None at all. So then it's something that I won't ingest. And actually that just segues into what I want to talk about next, which is nutrient density. It's important for us to get our carbohydrates from nutrient dense vegetables, not cookies and cakes, and right, from nutrient dense vegetables. And it's important for us to get our fats from nutrient dense foods, like the fat that comes along with our protein, rather than from fat bombs and drinking oils in our coffee. I'm not going to say that there's never a use case for having a carbohydrate that comes from a nut, for example, or a carbohydrate that comes from milk. Sorry, not milk, but like a dairy product like cheese or cream. I'm not going to say there's never a use case for that. The same way I'm not going to say that there's never a use case for having a fat bomb. But I'm talking about getting the majority of your carbohydrates from those sources. At that point, you have to ask yourself about nutrient density. It's important for you to get the majority of your carbohydrates from nutrient-dense vegetables and nutrient-dense protein/fatty products. So the fat that comes along with the protein. When we're talking about trusting ourselves with food, one of the main things that I'd have to say that will come up is this idea of, is it okay to have a cheat day? And, you have to just ask yourself, well, is it okay to have a cheat day? Is the same thing like asking, is it okay to have a smoke day? Is it okay to have an alcohol day? If those are two things that I struggled with and gave up. I struggle with the idea that I would have taken so much time, energy, effort to put myself in a position to become a fat burner when I lived years of my life as a carb burner. It was work. It was withdrawal. We go through withdrawal symptoms to make that switch and become to go from being a carb burner to a fat burner, to turn around and then have a cheat day. I struggle with that idea because it means that what I'm saying is all that effort and energy that I put in, I'm willing to give it up for one day. Okay, but let's look at what happens if I do decide to have a cheat day. What might that day look like? And I'm not even going to go for a cheat day. Let's back it up. What happens if I decide I'm going to eat a cookie? If I decide to have a cookie, there's a possibility that I'm that person that I can have one cookie and then move on. And so let's look at that story for a second. Well, one cookie, I probably can fit into my macros, right? I could probably have one cookie, which the average chocolate chip cookie, so one chocolate chip cookie is 9 grams of carbs. I could probably fit that into my day. Okay, so is it gonna be the end of the world that I had that cookie? No. Will it mean I'm eating a bit less vegetables on that day? Very likely. Okay, but what happens if I'm that person that has a really hard time eating one cookie? Now we've just changed the story. Because one cookie, which is 9 grams of carbs, which is almost 2 teaspoons of sugar, let's put this on perspective. Well, what if I eat one and now I have to eat 3 or 4? Okay, well, 4 cookies has just put me at 36 grams, right? Which means that all of a sudden, I went from fitting it into my macros to blowing my whole day's worth of carbohydrates on 4 cookies. Okay, what's the chance that I'm gonna not need to eat anything else today at 4 cookies? Probably not likely, right? So that's 4 cookies on top of whatever else I happen to have eaten that day. Which means that even if I was doing the rest of my day perfect, not even just trying to, let's say I did the rest of my day perfect and I actually did nothing else but really good quality food, high nutrient density, my body is still working like a crazy person to get that sugar because you're adding it to whatever other sugars I ate, whatever other vegetables that came in to get that out of my day, to get it out of my body, right? Now, if that happens to push me over and now I'm no longer in ketosis, I'm no longer a fat burner for this day, the unfortunate reality is that most people who experience that scenario, if they stop being fat burners, especially early in the process, so I'm not talking about someone who's been in a ketogenic lifestyle for years or someone who's been doing low carb, high fat for years. I'm talking about someone who's just in the beginning of this process and they decide to have 4 cookies, but then live the rest of their day perfectly. What's going to happen? Well, the truth is, what's going to happen is that if they get kicked out of ketosis, if they get kicked out of fat burning, they're going to fall into 3 or 4 days that they're not burning fat for fuel as a primary situation, that their body, because their insulin level rose, will be storing. And then they're going to get to the end of the week and do their weigh-in and be frustrated and believe that this lifestyle doesn't work. And if they're doing that repeatedly because they think, oh, it's just 4 cookies, oh, it's just 2 French fries, oh, if you do that repeatedly, you will struggle with the weight loss that you're trying to accomplish. We're going to add to this that you're also going to start to have cravings, right? So here's the thing. If I'm trying to, especially at the beginning of this process, and I can't stress this enough, these kind of things tend to happen to people who are at the beginning of their process, tend to. I'm not saying that there aren't people who are in for years and then they eat something and all of a sudden, but for the most part, it seems to me that the people who are at the beginning of the process and are focused on the foods they can't have, rather than focusing on the foods that they can have, end up in this struggle with food where they keep eating high carb, low quality foods that puts them to crave foods like this, which puts them to be out of fat burning. And so they're constantly starting over. And it's difficult because when your brain gets that hit of sugar and dopamine is saying, that's fun, and your brain is saying, get more sugar, it's hard to not get it. And so we have to be careful about allowing ourselves to engage the situation where we say, oh, it's not just a cookie. It's a bunch of carbs that you don't necessarily need. No, you absolutely don't need, but you don't necessarily want, except for your brain pushing you for it. Are my health goals, are my weight loss goals a priority to me? Or is my need for a cookie a bigger priority? Is my need for a piece of chocolate cake a bigger priority? We need to allow ourselves to look at the situation in front of us and make a true decision. So talk to yourself, be honest with yourself. Am I really saying that all the work I put into to get to this point where I'm on a fat burning path that I'm willing to give up for the taste of this cookie that's going to last a few minutes? Is that really what I want to do? And I think when you start to allow yourself to ask these questions out loud and look at what's happening, you're going to see that, again, this is me allowing a craving to tell me what to do, and allowing a craving to say that my health goals that I have for myself are not important enough. And we know that's not true. We know that you wouldn't have been on this path. You wouldn't have been trying to focus on better health. You wouldn't be trying to do these things for yourself if you didn't feel like your health was the most important thing that you have. You wouldn't be trying to do this if you didn't believe that. So it's really a matter of seeing what's happening. If I don't stop and look at what I'm doing and question myself, Violet, why are you taking up this cookie? Are you hungry? If you're hungry, why are we not going to get some nutrient-dense, healthy food that will keep you a fat burner and keep you on the path that you're trying to be on? Am I asking myself those questions? You know, if you want fun foods, then what you need to do is you need to look first and foremost at the foods that are recommended to eat. So all the meats, all the delicious dairy and nuts and seeds, and look at the foods that are recommended to eat and see what combination of these foods can I do that are going to taste great to me. What kind of spices can I buy and start to use that are going to taste great to me? What kind of desserts can I make out of the foods that I'm allowed to have that are going to taste great to me? It is absolutely possible to have delicious meals and terrific desserts made from the foods that are within a ketogenic lifestyle. But it does take some research. And honestly, I don't even believe that at the beginning of this process, we need to do that to start. If any of us was to be completely honest, and we were to go back in history and look at the 6 months, not even, can even look at the 2 months before we started this ketogenic journey, and looked at what were my typical meals during the week. From week to week, what was I eating? We're probably going to recognize that from week to week, we were eating pretty much the same thing. Most people have a menu of specific foods that they make on a regular basis, and that's what they eat. And it's not widely different, it's not vastly different. But yet, whenever we start a new lifestyle, whenever we decide to pay more attention to our health and to try to be healthy and eat better foods, we start looking for fun foods to eat. We start to say that, oh, I can't just eat that. The truth is, if you look back on your history, you were eating probably 5 or 6, maybe 10 things if you're in a really, if you really love cooking. Most people aren't doing that. So do I really need to have such variety? And at the beginning of this ketogenic way of life, I encourage people, find a few meats that you like, find a few vegetables that you like, find a few different ways to cook those meats and vegetables so that you can combine them. And you probably have enough to get through a month or 2 or 3 before you start to get bored. But by that point, you're so invested and you're feeling so amazing that finding other foods and other desserts and other things. So finding desserts, first of all, that fall inside this way of eating will be what you will want to do. You will be seeking that out. Also, throwing this out there because I know it happened to me, that sweet that you were looking for will no longer taste as great as you thought it would when you actually put it in your mouth. It'll be overwhelming. And you know, it reminds me of my daughter when she was born, and I didn't give her any sweets until she was past 4 years old. And I remember the first time I gave her something sweet and the look on her face, and it was just like, and it's too sweet became a phrase that I heard once she passed 4. It's too sweet, it's too sweet. She didn't want it. Right? And it's weird because we push our kids to eat sweet things, even though from babies, when you put sweet stuff in a kid's mouth, you see that reaction. But we don't understand. We don't understand that that's our body saying, oh my God, stop. Let's listen to our bodies. You know, to be happy in life, it takes investing some work, some energy in you, because happiness takes work. And I need you to understand that it's a lifestyle. It's a long-term project. Both happiness and health are long-term projects, right? And you need to work on that. You need to be able to look at what you're doing and say, you know what? I'm going for the long term. If you like this video, I want you to put in the comment down below, happiness and health are a long-term project, and I'm working on mine. Tell me how you're working on it. I'd really love to know. I want to thank you for watching Mind Blowing Health and Wellness with Violet, and I will see you in the next video. I absolutely appreciate that you guys watched the video all the way to the end. This is a good opportunity for you to hit that subscribe button so that you'll see my upcoming videos. And I'd really love to know what you guys want to hear me talk about next. So put comments and questions and ideas for future videos in the comment section so that I can make videos that are going to be what you want to hear me talk about. If you liked my video today, please give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give me a thumbs down. I can't wait to talk to you guys again, and I will see you in the next video.